The world is changing. For centuries, money, power, and wealth rested in the hands of Western, European institutions. Democracy, freedom, equality, values born and spread throughout Europe, were once thought to be the keys to prosperity. But every day we're beginning to realize that this isn't necessarily true. The world economy has been shifting from west to east in the last few decades. Capital and investment is growing exponentially in East Asian economies, and with it comes growth and development. But why? Why has East Asia, a region almost devoid of natural resources, become synonymous with wealth? And why are businesses beginning to favor these East Asian economies more than Western ones? East Asia has not always been as wealthy as it is today. At the beginning of the 20th century, most East Asian nations were dirt-poor backwaters, ravaged by famine, war, and dictatorship. In 1960, South Korea's GDP per capita was a mere $158. In Taiwan, it was $150, Singapore $428, Japan $475, and in China it was a dismal $89. In fact, for most of the 20th century, the word China was simply used to express famine and hunger, far off the synonym it is for wealth and prosperity today. With the exception of Japan, East Asia was tightly gripped by authoritarians following World War II. In South Korea, a brutal military regime was established by the American occupiers, crushing opposition and pro-democracy reformers with barbarity. In Taiwan, the Kuomintang, who fled mainland China, established a dictatorship under their leader Chiang Kai-shek, leading to a regime of mass censorship and grim human rights violations. This story was repeated throughout the region, in places like Singapore, China, and Vietnam. Yet the effects of these autocratic regimes were unexpected, to say the least. In the mid to late 20th century, economists predicted low economic growth and development for East Asian economies. Yet, by 1990, the region became one of the most prosperous on the planet, with some countries achieving double-digit growth. How could this have happened? After all, economic dogma up to that point taught that economic growth and development could not be achieved without democracy or liberty. Well, the simple fact is, the governments lied. Authoritarian regimes are not subject to the same standards as democratic ones, so East Asian governments lied in order to mislead the public into developing the economy. They deliberately got the prices of certain sectors wrong to trick investment, and this worked. In South Korea, the state gave false, more optimistic growth models in the electronics industry, and granted cheap credit and subsidies to those who pursued electronic development. The result was a flourishing South Korean electronics market and the birth of their flagship company, Samsung. Japan similarly used this tactic to create a flourishing car manufacturing industry. Alongside the lies, strong tariffs were imposed. This strategy allowed these domestic industries to grow inside their respective countries without having to worry about any foreign competition. But as well as foreign, the authoritarian regimes of East Asia also attempted to destroy any domestic competition. East Asian governments in the 20th century did not want to leave the economy to chance. Often, a single company was chosen in each industry to become the dominant force. This firm would be tightly monitored by the government to ensure loyalty and positive growth. Then the government would direct cheap credit towards them, while simultaneously withholding any from those that tried to compete. Once these firms were beefed up, they opened up to the world, competing internationally and becoming global economic forces. There was no such thing as a free East Asian market during this time. All domestic firms were tightly controlled by their government to ensure stability and pre-planned outcomes. It may seem troubling to us in the West, an economy centered around authoritarian regimes where decisions are controlled by the central authorities and outcomes precisely planned by those in power, but the results are undeniable. Since the end of World War II, East Asia has achieved staggering economic growth and development. In Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, China, all have turned from third world backwaters into global economic titans. Companies like Samsung, Hyundai, Mitsubishi, Toyota, and Huawei are now household names. Countries like Singapore and Taiwan are now synonymous with wealth and prosperity, becoming global financial hubs for businesses all over the world. But the social consequences have been dire. The state-led development pursued by these nations only served to strengthen authoritarian rule, making economic development inseparable from dictatorship. Without the institutions that allowed these dictatorships to thrive, economic development would have been abandoned. In South Korea, the military regime maintained legitimacy through economic growth. What resulted was mass repression of those who wanted democracy, including assassination, kidnapping, forced disappearances, and torture of pro-democracy dissidents. In several instances, protesters were massacred by South Korean authorities. For example, in the city of Gwangju in 1980, student protesters demonstrated against the coup of May 18th. What followed is today considered the greatest atrocity of South Korean history, as troops blocked every entrance and exit to the city and began opening fire on protesters. 165 civilians were killed, with 76 more still missing today. Today, South Korea is now a fully functioning democracy, but democracy only arrived there once economic prosperity had been achieved. Even today, South Korea struggles with the legacy of its state-led development. The tight control which the previous military regimes held on economic development meant that corruption was a simple part of the government's everyday functioning. Since democratization in 1988, 4 South Korean presidents have served time in jail because of corruption, showing how ingrained the problem truly is. In Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek's regime was justified through economic development, allowing political repression to endure until 1996. Singapore today, though incredibly wealthy, remains a one-party state, sometimes referred to as Disneyland with the death penalty. The ruling party has promised that democracy would come once the economy had been strengthened, something which will probably not happen anytime soon, as the state institutions which promote economic development have been built to serve the ruling party as well. And of course, China remains the worst offender, a brutal one-party autocracy kept in power by its rapid economic growth. When Deng Xiaoping came to power in 1978, his economic reforms showed much promise. Finally, the world's largest economy was beginning to liberalize, and the world anticipated that the political system would follow suit. But those dreams were squashed in 1989, when countless pro-democracy activists were massacred in Tiananmen Square. Will this trend continue? Since the East Asian economic miracle was achieved, it seems the economy is changing faster than the state can keep up. Some countries have embraced this fact, like South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, who let go of the leash to allow the economy to grow on its own, but others haven't. China and Singapore, for example, seem determined to hold a tight grip, and the consequences of this stubbornness are beginning to become clear. In China, economic growth looks set to unravel. The Chinese economy now seems just as unstable as the Western economies investors were looking to get away from. China's state-led development, though successful in many industries, has set up their real estate market for disaster. Evergrande, China's largest real estate company, has gotten into massive debt as a result of China's cheap credit policy. In September 2021, the company defaulted on much of this debt, yet still has over $18 billion to pay back, something which will likely prevent them from building those 1.6 million homes they promised to build for customers who have already paid. In the coming years, this could be the next global economic crisis and spell disaster for the Chinese economy. Though the world economy has already shifted further east in the last few decades, it's unknown whether the trend will continue. But what is certain is that East Asia has taught us all one very important fact: democracy doesn't matter. Money does.